In 1992, Wolfenstein 3D completely changed the PC gaming landscape. When it came out, it jump-started the FPS genre, and what's crazier than the fact that the mad lads at id Software would release a game like this in 92 is that they would massively improve upon it the very next year with Doom. In this way, Wolfenstein 3D was the first draft of the formula they would instantly perfect in Doom, and as such, Wolfenstein 3D is a masterpiece of early 90s PC game design that became obsolete in the shadow of its own creator's other work. You're watching Rayl Deal Games, and today, I'm taking another look at one of the first games I've ever played for the first time in 22 years or so. I make new gaming videos every single Friday about a variety of gaming topics, and in the coming weeks, I'll be looking at Doom 2 and Doom Dark Ages. If those are of interest to you, consider subscribing. My big goal for the year is 10,000 subscribers, and with you in my community, I know I can get there. Obsolescence is often viewed as a sign of objectively feeble design, as a true masterpiece would never become irrelevant in the shadow of a newer product, especially one of its own progeny. Yet, this sort of relationship exists in the context of film. Many people would call Alien a great film, and they would say Aliens is better. I personally wouldn't, since Alien is my favorite movie, but the common opinion is that Aliens is better. Does Aliens being better make Alien outdated? Films are different from games for sure, but this sort of relationship between subsequent pieces of media is something consistent across all art forms. Is The Hobbit made worse because most would say Lord of the Rings is better? I would argue that despite the relationship between the first work by a creator and the others that would spawn from its success, the original can maintain its status as a classic or masterpiece despite not being as epic in scope as its immediate offspring. To me, Wolfenstein 3D has this relationship with Doom. Doom is clearly the better game, timeless in its design, whereas Wolf 3D is dated in its design, archaic in its entirety. Yet this aspect of antiquity should not be the only thing we remember Wolf 3D for. It was a revelatory piece of design. In his video, Doom Didn't Kill the Amiga, Wolfenstein 3D Did, Modern Vintage Gamer explores the relationship between Wolf 3D and the history of PC gaming, specifically the Amiga line of hardware. How could a game responsible for the death knell dirge of an entire line of product not have design worth remembering fondly for its place in the history of this art form? I'll be looking at Wolf 3D's level design, difficulty, and Spear of Destiny expansion to explain why this game is a masterpiece, albeit an archaic one. Let's dive right in, shall we? If there's one thing that all boomer shooters, which were known as Doom clones back in the 90s, shared, it was the core loop of entering a murder room, finding keys, and repeating the loop. It's a simple and majestic gameplay cycle that focuses on the game playing. The only thing considered important in shooters, at least until Half-Life came out. Wolf 3D isn't any different, as the whole game is centered around killing Nazis, finding keys, both silver and gold, and taking a shoot to the next level. Rinse and repeat, and that's the whole game. This simplicity is actually to Wolf's benefit, and that's probably why the indie scene has started to really blow up over the past decade with loads of throwback boomer shooters. This gameplay first approach truly enhances the experience of playing a game like this, and if there's one critique I can level at more modern shooters, even fantastic ones like Doom Eternal, it's that cinematics, platforming, and progression systems sometimes distract from the reason people choose to play a classic shooter like Wolf 3D or its contemporaries. There's a story in Wolf 3D, but it never gets in the way of the gameplay and is typically little more than set dressing for the next area of the campaign the player is getting to. Instead, Wolf uses level design, atmospheric elements, and its color palette to communicate a vibe for the player's task at hand. Everyone knows who Hitler is and the atrocities committed by him and his rhetoric, so there's no need for exposition. Murder, pure, simple, and bloody, is all the player needs, and in terms of enemies, actual factual Nazis are hardly difficult to get into a moral tizzy about jibbing. In Wolf 3D levels, there's loads of small things such as the cold castle stone walls, skeletons in cages, pools of water possibly from waterboarding or something of that ilk, on the floor of certain prison chambers, and evidence of the guards' torturous pastime dot rooms here or there. Sometimes right across the hall from these prison cells are officers' quarters lush with food. Sinks, toilets, and beds are in various places throughout the game, and all of these elements make the playable space of the game feel like a real world that these Nazis live and work in, and that's really all all the story of Wolf 3D needs. They've captured the player as evidenced by the cell the game starts in, and the only way out is by fighting up several floors, killing the commandant, and escaping to the sunny fields outside. I always felt that the game was pretty good at getting across to the player that they were moving up through a castle as they progressed, as certain textures present in the later stages of the first part always looked almost like a night sky to me, almost as if the player is just having one really long night before succeeding in their mission at the dawn of daylight. And at least for episodes 1 through 3 and most of Spear of Destiny, the level design on display is quite good for the time. There's usually a central area where the locked doors of the levels hiding the exit behind them are, and the player can find the silver and gold keys by taking paths out of that centralized location. It's not how it works literally every single time, obviously, as later levels do get a bit more creative with the ways in which they fake out the ending of the level. There's only a handful of times in Wolf 3D where the level design felt truly obnoxious, such as level 14 of Spear of Destiny and the prequel chapters. There's an experimentation on display in this game that would clearly become refined and mastered for its younger sibling, Doom. That experimentation isn't just limited to the level design though, as the difficulty of Wolf 3D is also the testing ground for a system of punishment and emotional reward that would also become refined for id Software's other timeless pieces of art. For this playthrough, I played Wolfenstein 3D on I Am Death Incarnate. Well, I played through most of the game at this difficulty. You see, Wolf 3D is a mostly fair title, but there are a few things in the later episodes of the game that make this kind of a miserable experience to play on this particular difficulty. This is really down to the existence of the zombie soldiers that begin to show up in episode 2, Operation Eisenfaust. What makes this particular enemy type quite difficult is the near non-existence of startup frames for their attack, an attack that does insane damage at higher difficulties. This is the type of threat that sometimes leads to death so fast you're not likely to know what even happened. In some ways, the zombie soldiers are the prototype design of the chain gunners from Doom. The core key difference between them is how the zombie soldiers immediately start shooting the instant a section of the player enters their LOS, line of sight. In Doom, chain gunners have a second where they wind up their shot. It's only a few frames, but it is enough to provide the player time to respond, which is not the case with the zombie soldiers, which can just kill the player the instant a pixel of theirs turns the corner. If it weren't for them, the hardest difficulty of this game would actually be quite manageable and fun, and they are exclusively the reason I don't really enjoy the second episode that much, even on lower difficulties. It's a bit of Wolf 3D's design that id's immediate next game would massively improve upon. Beyond this, the bosses in Wolf 3D are significantly more difficult than the ones that would exist in later id games. Part of the reason this is the same as to why the zombie soldiers are so difficult, as the bosses start shooting the instant a player's pixel is visible. The difference between them and the zombie soldiers is the fact that it is easier to use the environment to the player's advantage. The big bulbous weapons the bosses use in this game don't play well with the harsh, stark corners within their boss arenas, which the player can use to their benefit almost like a one-sided wall. Obviously, the player has to peek the corners, but it's far easier to get in some free damage on the bosses than it is to do so to the more difficult zombie enemies. Some bosses even have projectile attacks, which actually makes them quite fun to interact with. This is probably part of the reason the first boss in Doom is the Cyber Demon, a boss with projectile-based missiles. The later hit-scanning Spider Mastermind makes it more impossible to stay in the open and dodge and weave around attacks. In Wolfenstein, the experimentation with projectile-based attacks is a massively important one, as this is the sort of enemy that is far more enjoyable to combat. That being said, I'd be remiss to talk about bosses without mentioning the most iconic one in the entire game, Mecha Hitler. He's really not that hard, but it's never not satisfying to see him melt. I think part of the reason Wolf 3D avoided the heavy-handed criticism of the early 90s in regards to violence in video games is because of its choice of enemy. Politicians of the time probably didn't want to try and say the game was morally wrong. Nazis are Nazis after all. The difficulty in Wolf 3D doesn't really move past these elements, however. The other enemies in the game are incredibly easy to stun lock with a simple left click, and unlike other boomer shooters that would take up Wolf's mantle, the game only has essentially one weapon. I mean, technically the title has 3, but since they are all just faster variations of the base pistol, I don't think they truly count. All 3 weapons even use the same ammo source, and unlike a game like Doom 2, the player is never in any real danger of running out of ammo, even on the hardest difficulty settings. Even in Spear of Destiny, where the number of enemies is increased quite substantially, the developers included large larger ammo crates to compensate, and considering how weak the base knife is, this is a good bit of design. Unlike Doom's chainsaw, Wolf's knife does not work to get the player ahead on the ammo economy of the game in a relatively safe manner. The chainsaw is a natural counter to Pinky's, making the use of it a clear way of preserving ammunition that need not be used on them. In Wolf, using the knife is a great way of just dying, because it's not particularly useful on any enemy in the game. There is the start of a stealth system in this game, as Nazis will become alerted whenever the player fires a gun, whereas the knife is a stealthy way of dealing with threats. Beyond killing the first enemy to get access to his pistol, I never found a use for this weapon though. If anything, the stealth measures in this game is just a nice way of setting up some sick ambushes on groups of Nazi goons. It is super cool how the enemies in this game will travel between rooms to hunt the player down. It's an element of Wolf 3D that is particularly unique and immersive for its time, as most other games' enemies were more or less locked into their specific rooms or designated spawning spots. It's very easy to look at all the improvements Doom adds in just 1 year after Wolf 3D's release and write the game off as an important but outdated game. And while it definitely hasn't aged as well as Doom, Quake, or other boomer shooters from the 90s, Wolf 3D is no less as valuable, especially considering the way it exhibits so many fantastic FPS design elements without direct inspirations to pull from. It's part of the reason Wolf 3D has been in my top 100 of the 90s ever since I started working on that list back in 2018. But after playing the game again for the first time in over 2 decades, should it remain? Wolfenstein 3D is a personal game for me. It's one of the first games I'd ever beaten, definitely placing within the first 20 I ever rolled credits on. My father built my brothers and I this Windows 95 PC back in the early 2000s so that we could enjoy DOS titles like Wolfenstein 3D, Warcraft, Age of Empires, and Fallout. It got put into a storage unit and I never saw it again. I remember seeing the storage unit door close on it. It was stacked on other things in the top left of the unit, and I remember thinking that it was going to get ruined because of rainwater or that it would fall and break. That's probably what happened to it, and it's such a shame. Oftentimes this should give a game a nostalgic shield, but since my childhood is one full of painful memories, Wolfenstein 3D prompted the return of long forgotten echoes from the past that probably should have stayed in the shadows. I'm not really going to get into this here since it's not the video for it, but it's important to include this information that, if anything, nostalgia worked against Wolfenstein 3D for me. It's a marker of the game's timeless quality when it can survive the association with my pre-middle school childhood. Playing Wolfenstein 3D again after 22 years has been an emotional experience because of where this game took me mentally. It was at times a painful experience, not because of it being outdated or clunky, but because of the memories I uncovered as I progressed towards Mecha Hitler. Episode 1, 3, and Spear of Destiny are the parts of Wolfenstein 3D that make its place as a fixture of my 90s top 100 an assured thing, but it is going to be knocked down to the blue category because there are elements of the game's design that I don't like as much anymore, such as how the zombie Nazis work in the context of this title. Games in my various top 100 lists are separated into blue and red categories, with red games being ones that aren't likely to ever leave the list, and blue ones being in the first round of cuts whenever I'm considering another game for the limited 100 slots. Wolf 3D has been in the red category since the inception of this list, however, it is getting downgraded today, making it one of the only games from my original top 50 to be up for being cut in the future. It's a game that I love, but as I continue to play more and more games from the 90s, it becomes harder to justify its eternal placement on the list. It's undeniably a masterpiece of early 90s game design, albeit an archaic one. And that's the video, my guys. What do you think of Wolfenstein 3D and my analysis of it? Let's discuss this game and everything vintage gaming in the comments below, and while you're down there, smash that like button and subscribe. Ringing the notification bell is the only way to ensure you don't miss out on my other and future work. And if you have a moment right now, consider checking out one of my other videos on the screen. Regardless of what you choose to do, thank you for keeping it real with Rayl Deal Games. Have an awesome day, my friend.